Welcome back everybody, it's Rich here. This week's video is our buying guide on the second generation Subaru Impreza WRX STI. These cars are, for me now, getting to an age 15 to 20 years old and are very much becoming modern classics. They're starting to appreciate, they have been for the last few years, and I think they're only become more sought after in the years to come. So quite a significant investment into these cars now at that age, and I thought it'd be really good to find out what I've learned over the last year, 18 months in the hunt for a really good STI. The second generations came in three variants, really, evolutions, all annotated largely by the shape of the headlights. The first iteration was the bug eye, which were the circular headlights, then came the blob eye, which this is, and then the latter hawk-eye, which was the thinner, narrower headlights. And it's probably those hawk-eyes that are slightly less desirable, because when they switched from the blob to the hawk-eye on the Type UK STIs, they went from the pretty robust 2-litre turbo to the 2.5-litre turbo. That, over time, the 2.5 has proven to be more problematic than the very robust 2-litre. So for me, I'd avoid the Hawkeye Type UK. It gets a little bit more confusing because some of the Hawkeye imports, the JDMs, actually stayed with the 2-litre. And that goes on to an important point. When you're looking at buying an STI, the first priority for me is do your research, understand what the jargon, the Subaru jargon is with regard to these cars. Do your research, there's a lot to know. Whether it's a wide track, whether it's got the DCCD, which is driver's control centre differential, what a Spec C is, the Type UK, the JDM, did it come with a Pro Drive Performance Pack, There's lots and lots of Subaru jargon. Do your research, get to understand what you're looking at, because it's really important. The other important point to note is it Type UK or is it JDM, Japanese domestic market, in other words the import route. The JDMs have the stronger engine. They produce slightly more power, they rev slightly higher, and they should in theory be better with regard to rust because they've lived in a better climate. A couple of negatives with JDM imports. One is history. It will be far more patchy and you'll be less sure of what the history is of the JDM imports. And secondly, and for me really important, was unfortunately they have equal length headers, so you don't get that typical Subaru warble, and that noise is what I really wanted. Very much individual. I'm not knocking one against the other, but you need to know what you're looking at, JDM or Type UK. This is specifically around the JDM UK. Around service history, for me, that's where I would absolutely start. You need, and let me just take this here, you need to have service history. It is really important when buying a Subaru. These cars are really robust cars. They are very reliable, but the flat 4-boxer engines do need regular servicing. I would avoid any car that doesn't come with full service history. Ideally with receipts, but you want that service book fully stamped up, preferably with a reputable specialist. If it's been done by the individual owners, I think cars now at 15, 20 years old, you've got to expect that to occur. But have they got receipts for the oil? Have they got receipts for filters? Have they got receipts for the maintenance they've carried out? Service history is really important, and my number one tip when it comes to a buying guide. And the second key observation on STIs, they were absolutely prone to modification and modifying. In fact, trying to find a standard STI is an incredibly difficult thing to do. But that doesn't mean you discount the modified cars, because some people, that's what they actually want. And for unmodified, the standard ones, they weren't particularly quick cars. Power was 265 brake horsepower, unless it came with the Pro Drive Performance Pack, which lifted it to 305 brake horsepower. So by modern day standards, that's pretty average, where now most hot hatches have more than the standard STIs. And that's led to many STIs being modified. That's okay, but you need to go in with your eyes absolutely wide open. Who's done what has been done, has it been done by a reputable garage, have good quality components been fitted. So that's all worth bearing in mind when it comes to looking at the STI. First of all, I'm going to do it in a few sections. I'm going to do exterior, do the engine, we'll do the inside, and then we'll do about how the car needs to drive. So first of all, exterior. Two main tips when it comes to viewing an Impreza STI. First one is you really needs to be dry. And dry because wet and rain, all that will do is mask potential problems with bodywork. It'll make the car look nicer and tidier than it is. You need to be checking on a dry, clean surface. And the second key tip is rust, rust and rust again. And specifically with the Type UKs, that age now at 15, 20 years old, if they've not been protected from the weather, if they've not been looked after, rust will become an issue. Where? Well, pretty much everywhere, but particular attention is the rear arches. And it's not just looking at whether there's any bubbling in the paint at all, but that's what you're looking at. If there is, and if it's visible on the outside, I will guarantee that what lies beneath is 10 times worse. It is the typical tip of the iceberg. So have a look externally first for any visible signs of rust. If there is any, my preference would be you walk away, because you could be looking at an expensive repair. But if it looks okay from the outside, get inside the arch and have a feel and look around the inner part. Get your fingers around there. Does it all feel tight? Does it all feel secure? Then move along to the sill. And again, the same from the outside, but also get under the car with a torch, lay down if you need to, and get right in underneath that car. Prevalent 15, 20 years of winter weather could well have got in and behind on the inner sills. So check the car both externally and underneath with your fingers, with your eyes, with a torch. Check, check, check. All for rust. Less of important though is tyres, brakes, etc. Good observation is tyres. It's a massive giveaway. Do they all match is the first one. Are they all of a premium tyre? If they're not, if they don't all match, or they're not of a premium tyre, ask yourself, has this owner got the funding and the money to do what's needed on this car? These cars are expensive cars to run. They're poor in regard to MPG. They've got high maintenance schedules. These cannot be run on a budget. If these are anything other than premium tyres, I would personally walk away. Once you've checked the quality, check the tread. Is there plenty of tread? Is the tread even? Because these are four-wheel drive cars, they are prone to wear uneven on the tyres. So check all around for wear. The brakes and discs, pads, less of an issue actually, because these are consumable items that will wear. But again, just feel the disc. Is there any lipping on the disc? Difficult sometimes to check pad wear, but have a look around. Does the caliper look in good condition? Mine were actually refurbed before I bought the car, so they actually look really quite tidy and clean. But again, certainly doesn't stop you buying the car, but it might give you some negotiating skills if you can see pads that are well worn and discs that are quite badly lipped and you know will need replacing. It's only a few £100 per corner, but be aware. Whilst you're in here though, have a look at the car suspension, the springs, dampers, etc. Get yourself in there, have a look, especially at the turret mounts in the rear. Can you see any sort of signs of rust or corrosion at all? Next up is the spoiler. You see, what happens is that water collects here, and there's a couple of small drain holes where my fingers are, and if they get blocked up, what happens is that there's a puddle that sits here on the back of the boot, and that slowly starts corroding, mostly at the back actually of the spoiler. Again, and mine's got one or two very, very slight signs of rust. Again, it's not necessarily a deal breaker because these spoilers can be taken off and the fix can be done. But again, it's a good negotiating tactic. Next up is the front of the STI. Again, old cars that have covered, well, in my case, 100,000 miles, you're going to expect stone chips. Mine's quite heavily marked, actually, once you get up close. If it's not been, and it all looks pretty good, the chances are it's been resprayed. And that's no bad thing. Obviously, what you've got to be careful about is accident damage. And there's a few signs you can check for accident damage about how the panels fit together. But again, have a good look around, but do expect some stone chips. Unless you're buying a really low mileage car, but as I say, if you're buying one with, let's say, 100,000 miles on like this, there's going to be a few blemishes. The front of the bonnet's quite badly stone chipped and marked, and certainly the front bumper really could do with a bit of a respray. So the final couple of things with regard to exterior as we move into the engine bay is, on the paintwork, is have a look here. Don't be alarmed when you see the difference between the engine bay blue and the external blue. When I first looked at Subaru, I was a bit alarmed at the colour inside the engine bay. Well, that's absolutely normal, no issues with that. That's the way they left the factory. This dark blue is standard with the World Rally Blue on the exterior. So don't be alarmed with that. Secondly, with that foreign debris being thrown at the car, as well as the front of the car suffering, so can the top mounted intercooler. So have a look for the fins. Is it in good condition? Are the fins badly worn? Again, it's not a deal break, but it gives you an indication of A, how the owner has looked after the car, and secondly, a bit of a negotiating wiggle room. The engine bay as a whole is a bit of a mess to look at. It's not got the fancy plastic covers that more modern day cars has got, and it is just a bit of a mash of pipework and electrical harnesses all over the place. But again, without being a mechanic, there's still some very simple things you can check. Anything that's got the yellow cap is basically fluids that you can and should be checking. Whether it's windscreen wash, obviously that's important, but you've got your oil top up and your oil filler cap, you've got your coolant reservoir, you've got the top of your radiator, you've got your expansion tank, and then you've got your hydraulic brake fluid and hydraulic power steering fluid as well. Check all your fluids, check everything is good, topped up, and the oil looks clean, the coolant looks clean, etc. Obviously you're checking your levels as well. Make sure, and it's always worth speaking to the owner beforehand, that the engine is cold. You don't want to be checking any of this when it's hot, because you also want to start the car when it's cold. And things like the oil engine cap, again, just unscrew it, take it off and have a look. Is it clean? Is there any mayonnaise on the car, on the cap? It should all be nice and clean. Otherwise, what you're looking at is, again, just any perished cable, perished hoses, any leaks, seeps, splashes of fluid. A good way of checking is actually get right under the car and see if there's anything that you can visibly see underneath the car. Now that's easier if it's on a drive. It's even better if it happens to be in a garage. And the other telltale sign is actually have a look across the drive, have a look across the garage. Is there any marks there that suggest it has been leaking at some point in time? And the final thing with regard to the engine as well is the cam belt. Have a look at the belts that you can visually see, but also check the service history to make sure when the last cam belt change was done. It's every 5 years or 48,000 miles, I think, or maybe 60, 48 I think, but it's every 5 years. So these STIs now should be actually on their third cam belts now. So check the service history. Is it in there? Have you got a receipt for when it was last changed? The last thing you want to do is a cam belt go on you, probably one of the worst things possible. So again, check the service history. So regard to the inside, for comparison, this car's got nearly 100,000 miles on, and it's in great condition. They wear the miles really, really well. This seat, the driver's seat, normally the biggest telltale. Lumbar support, hardly anywhere at all. but you're checking for the seats for regard to rips, tears, fag burns, etc. These seats wear them out brilliantly. The pedals, normally telltale, these are metal aluminium pedals, so you're not going to be able to tell with regard to the what mileage they've done. Again, it's always worth lifting the mats, having a look under the mats at the carpet to see if there's any damp, moisture, is any water getting in, always a good tip. The centre dash itself, yes, it's pretty cheap plastic Japanese stuff in its day, but you know what, it's worn brilliantly. It doesn't show any marks or scratches at all. But check everything works, including specifically things like the driver's controlled central differential, the DCCD, if it's got one. Check the air conditioning's working, check the intercooler water spray is working. And then other things, you may find that quite a few radios have been replaced by more modern day radios. I really get the point that this is very old and antiquated, but I want to keep mine period. I want to keep it the same as it left the factory. But again, if one came with a more modern day wireless connectivity with your smartphone, that would absolutely be fine. And then the final thing is just on where the right knee is, this key fob. This key fob here, make sure the owner has the password for this key fob. You'll need this if your key fobs stop working because the batteries need replacing. You'll need to know what that password is to reset the immobiliser. If you don't know that and you haven't got a key fob working, you're in difficulties. If the owner doesn't know what the password is, but you've got a working key fob, there is a routine that you can go through to actually reset your password. When you come to start the car, it's really important that the car's, as I say, you've viewed the car when it's cold and you've checked everything when it's cold. So when you start the car, just check the exhaust. You're looking for any sort of smoke that it comes out. Now don't get any condensation that's there. If it's a damp, wet day when you start the car, you may get some condensation smoke. So you've got to make sure it's not that. But there should be very little to no smoke on startup. And certainly when it's ticking over, it should be absolutely smoke-free. One, on your test drive itself, when you give it, when it's fully warmed up and all the fluids are up to temperature and you start to accelerate, you're checking in the rearview mirror, check to see if there's any smoke emitting from that exhaust under full or partial throttle. There shouldn't be any at all. The noise of the engine as well, you've obviously got the typical warble of the flat 4 boxer engine. It is a very unique sound, but just listen out for any sort of high ticking noise. Ticking noise can mean things like piston slap, etc. So all those type of noises, just listen out for those compared to the traditional Subaru flat 4 noise. Once you get to sort of 3,500 revs, the turbo should really be spooling up there, and you should get a whole big, huge surge of power. It should push you back. You should feel it strong all the way up to sort of 6,500, 7,000 revs. That pull is there before you change the next gear. There should be no hesitation in the acceleration. It should be a very linear, the surge of turbo pull. Guard the gearbox, the 6-speed gearbox in the STI is really, really robust unit. It feels a little bit notchy. It feels very mechanical when you're using it, but it should, the short shift should throw into gears easily and quickly. Just a little bit of a mechanical feel to it. Just be aware with regard to the 5-speed gearbox that comes on the WRX, if that is being modified to sort of up to around 350 brake horsepower, the 5-speeds generally, that's all they can take. So just be aware if it's a modified and it's a non-STI with the 5-speed of that potential issue. But the 6-speed STI gearboxes are really, really robust and good. Steering, it will feel a little bit heavy in steering, certainly at lower speeds. You'll feel the 4-wheel drive and the differentials working when you're going from full lock to full lock. So it should feel a little bit like that, but once you get up to speed, start get flowing, it should really come into its own with regard to the steering. And when you take it on the ride, when you go over compressions, bumps, potholes, etc., listening out for knocking, and that's just potential suspension issues with regard to worn components. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but again, it gives you something with regard to negotiate. what I normally do when I bring the car back, then just leave it ticking over for 5 minutes as well. Just make sure there's no overheating issues and it all looks fine. If you buy correctly, if you buy a good one, whether it's the Type UK or you decide to go JDM import route, doesn't really make any difference. I think if you buy an STI and you buy the right one, you're buying a potential future classic, even if it may not be quite there yet, it certainly will be in the next few years. And I think values will only actually appreciate on these classics as we move into the EV generation. Buy well and you could have potentially some free driving here, but just be aware these are expensive cars to run. Certainly in regard to fuel consumption is high, servicing costs frequencies are regular, so they're not cheap cars to run. There we go. Hope you enjoyed it. Never done a buyer's guide before. Give me your thoughts in the comments below, what you thought about it, good, bad or indifferent. Take everything on board, read every one of them. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please subscribe somewhere down here. Thumbs up. Stay tuned. Another video next week. Thanks for watching.